You check your phone. Seen 3 hours ago. No reply. You tell yourself you don't care. Then you check again and again. But here's the strange part. The person who isn't answering you may be taking up more space in your mind than the people who actually are. Why? Why can one unanswered message become so difficult to ignore? You sent the message. Maybe it was something important. Maybe you spent 10 minutes deciding what to say. Maybe you rewrote it before finally pressing send. And then you waited 5 minutes. Nothing. 20 minutes. Still nothing. Then you see it. Seen. And somehow, that tiny word changes everything. Because before they opened the message, you had an explanation. Maybe they hadn't seen it. Maybe their phone was away. Maybe they were busy. But now you know they saw it. And you still don't know why they didn't answer. That's when your brain starts searching for an explanation. Maybe they're annoyed. Maybe you said something wrong. Maybe they don't know what to say. Maybe they're talking to someone else. Maybe they don't care. The problem is, you don't actually know. You're trying to solve a question without having enough information to solve it. And this is where the psychology becomes fascinating. Your brain is constantly trying to predict what happens next. When you know what to expect, uncertainty decreases. But when something important is unclear, your attention tends to return to it. And social situations can make this even stronger. Humans are deeply social creatures. For most of human history, knowing where you stood with other people mattered. Were they accepting you? Were they angry with you? Were you being excluded? Your brain had to constantly interpret social signals, a facial expression, a change in someone's voice, someone suddenly becoming quiet. Today, the signals look different. Now it's seen, typing, online, last, active. The technology is new, but the need to understand where we stand with other people isn't. And this creates something strange. You're not actually waiting for a text, you're waiting for certainty. That's why getting a reply doesn't always make the feeling disappear. Because sometimes the reply creates another question. What did they mean by that? Why did they take so long? Why was their response so short? You were waiting for an answer, but what you really wanted was certainty about how they felt about you. And that is much harder to get from a screen. Think about what happens next. You put your phone down. A few minutes later, you check it. Nothing. You put it down again. Then you hear a notification. Your brain immediately asks, was that them? You look, it isn't. And now you're thinking about the message again. This is where modern technology can amplify the cycle. Your phone gives you constant opportunities to check. Sometimes checking produces something interesting. Sometimes it produces nothing. And that unpredictability can keep the behavior going. So eventually you may not even be checking because you expect a reply. You're checking because you want to resolve the uncertainty. And that's a very different thing. But there's another problem. Your brain doesn't like empty spaces. When information is missing, it starts filling the space. And sometimes it fills it with a story about you. Maybe I'm annoying. Maybe I said too much. Maybe they don't like me anymore. Notice what happened. A person didn't answer a message. And your brain turned that into a statement about your identity. That's a huge leap, because these are two completely different things. They haven't replied. That's a fact. They don't care about me. That's an interpretation. And those two things can feel exactly the same, even though they aren't. This is where you can interrupt the cycle. The next time you're left on red, don't immediately choose an explanation. Give yourself several possibilities. They could be busy. They could be tired. They could have opened the message at the wrong time. They could be thinking about how to respond. They could have simply forgotten. Or yes, they could be choosing not to respond. But until you have more information, you don't know. And that's the uncomfortable part. You don't have to turn uncertainty into certainty. You can let it remain uncertain. Because sometimes the healthiest response isn't finding another explanation. It's realizing that you don't have enough evidence to create one. And there's another thing you can do. Take your attention back. Put the phone down. Turn off the notification for that conversation. Go do something that requires your full attention. Not because you don't care, but because you don't need to spend an entire afternoon monitoring something that hasn't changed. Because here's the cycle. You send the message, you wait, you check, you interpret, you feel something, you check again, and the more you check, the more important the message becomes. The phone isn't necessarily creating the thought. It's giving the thought somewhere to return to. And that may be the most important thing to understand about being left on red. Maybe it was never really about the message. Maybe it was about what happened in the silence after it. Because when there is no answer, your brain starts writing one. It gives the silence a meaning. And sometimes that meaning says more about your fears than it does about the person on the other side of the screen. So the next time you see, seen, and nothing else, remember this. You know they read your message. You don't know why they didn't reply. And between those two facts is a space your mind doesn't have to fill. You can wait. You can continue with your day, and you can let the other person decide when or if they want to answer. Because their silence is information about their behavior. It is not a measurement of your worth. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do with uncertainty is simply refuse to turn it into a story.